Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us today. This is what podcast number, do you know? 7, 8,
I don't know.
maybe. Today on Friday, June 24th,
That's
I
right.
believe.
2000.
22,
Atta boy.
I think. Last night I was watching a really good documentary, and it was incredible because I was chatting with my brother Tom yesterday. We were kind of in an argument a little bit, talking about politics, of course, right? Politics does that. and so when I went home, it was the furthest thing from my mind. And then I watched a documentary last night on Orson Welles and the War of the Worlds in 1938. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
You
yeah.
Remember
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Did you ever see the documentary?
I haven't seen a documentary, but I've seen probably different documentaries on it because it is hard to believe, when you see what actually happened. So it's very intriguing. And of course, I'm a big Orson Welles fan, so I've always kind of appreciated his dark look on the world,
Can I just
Orson
say
Welles did Rosebud, right? Or what was the name of that movie?
Citizen Kane.
Citizen
That
Kane.
was the big one, Citizen Kane.
Yeah, we had to study that. I had a film school in college, a film class that I really liked, and that was considered I think it's still considered the greatest movie ever made, just cinematography-wise.
Well,
But anyhow, that's...
but here's the thing, right? What you come away with, I can't help but think of this, because whether it's in our line of work or whether it's a theater dramatist like Orson Welles, the real question is, does the person make the production or does the production make the person? And I really feel when you watch this documentary on War of the Worlds, it shaped his style of production. It made him an international star. And it was all because of the controversy it created, not because of anything else.
Was it even before Citizen Kane? Was it really...
It was, yeah.
It was a radio show, right?
Well, what happened
Did Orson Welles have give us a little background. Did he have a weekly radio show or something?
It was in New York City. So what happened was he was well known on the East Coast, but he was not known really outside of the United States, and he certainly wasn't known in Hollywood. But Citizen Kane is what put him on the map in Hollywood, because that's when he had a contract with RCA, I think. I can't remember. But he had a production contract, and he was to make one movie a year. And so he was now in Hollywood.
He did The Birds too, right? Yes, he did.
Sure.
Oh my gosh. Birds. Do you remember? Do you ever see The Birds?
I know.
Oh my God. That's all about crows attacking the town. It's one of the worst movies. It's difficult. It's such a good movie, though.
But see, here's the thing, all right? When you watch this and you realize the time frame, we lived overseas, so it's funny because the history of the United States, you think you know it, right? And then a pandemic hits, and you have plenty of time to watch documentaries, quality documentaries, Ken Burn documentaries.
Yeah.
And you realize, wow, man, what did I not read? And we went to all kinds of good private schools, and I there were chunks of American history that just didn't sink in that I missed in high school. You understand the general, but 1938, War of the Worlds, Orson Welles, the time frame, the context, right? You had the Depression, which was in 29. You had the war over in Europe. You had all this fear. You had FDR saying the only thing to fear is fear itself. So our culture was in a state of shock, a state of fear, a state of uncertainty, and I see a lot of parallels with today. It's funny.
And science was kind of, in that era, science was coming of age, with Einstein and with just a lot of brilliant scientists. So it was becoming of age. It was becoming socially the standard. Religion had run everything up until then, for the most part, socially. Suddenly science had started to challenge that, whether it was Darwin and the theory of evolution or Einstein. From the late 1800s into the early 1900s, you had a cultural shift in terms of what's real, what's not real, what are the facts, what are the findings, and things move slow, but they were moving very fast for that time. So I think that there was an enormous anxiety about life out in space, right? Are there other beings on other planets? So this was a very legitimate fear in 1938 because there was nothing. We hadn't even, the moon, please. We hadn't even thought about landing on the moon yet. So I think that was kind of a backdrop to this. And of course, you have the war. You have communism, you have the Nazis, you have the Japanese, and the fear of the invasion on the West Coast. So you have a lot of anxiety, kind of like today, in terms of the mood of the nation.
Oh, big time.
You know.
And so let me ask you this. When you think about the power of the radio, try to imagine. I know in today's world we don't think about it because of all the visual stuff, but we take information in differently when we don't see it. When we see it, we make immediate judgments, and where our biases become real clear. It's just how the broadcaster looks, everything that we see. But can you imagine? Just think about it. Put yourself in 1938, listening to that broadcast. Okay, which, by the way, the people that were panicking and really fearful, they were coming into that midstream. They didn't know it was a theater production. So the real question is...
They turn the radio on and it's halfway through the show.
So do you know how far that broadcast was, as far as like what states in the U.S. it was reaching?
No, I have no idea. I thought it was nationwide.
It was nationwide.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? And the irony is, like, when you watch that War of the Worlds documentary, they have people from all over the U.S., Northern California, Idaho, Nebraska, right? And what you really see are very rational people losing their minds.
Acting very irrationally.
Yeah, losing their minds. And the whole point is that you have to really understand the separation between fact and fiction. What is theatrical? What is a production? What's the purpose of the production? And what it got me thinking about after our argument yesterday was our media today, regardless of where you're at on how you feel about this or that, it's so production driven and in a theatrical sense, that us, the listeners or viewers, are left with, we need to know the history of the War of the Worlds, because that kind of story and all of the scrutiny afterwards and all of the apologies from CBS and from Orson Welles himself, because he was afraid of going to prison.
Yeah, people jumping off. People killed themselves.
Dude, there were judges that wanted him put away for a couple decades because they felt what he did was so irresponsible. So, like, you get extreme, like, these are judges, right? Very educated people that were very extreme in their judgment about him.
Yeah.
And he's a theatrical guy, right? And so, it's a powerful thing because it really gives you an introspection into where we're vulnerable and why we feel today as naked and helpless as we did then.
Yeah.
Now, it's disguised differently, but there's a ton of fear and anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you, when you studied your American film, a little bit American film in college?
Yeah, well, it was
Okay.
a film class, but yeah.
Okay.
Because we did Seven Samurai, too, which is another story. I know that's one of your favorites, but go ahead.
Oh my God! Well,
Yeah.
The Seven Samurai is the basis for all the spaghetti westerns,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah.
But there are certain patterns in film, and you see them played over and over, right? But again, the separation between fact and fiction is a very thin line, right?
Yeah.
And so, what's the answer? When you think about how do you have accountability with the media and still have freedom of speech?
Yeah.
Okay, where do you go?
Well, when you think about the media, if we consider the media to be our source of truth, like they're supposed to be reporting the story as the story, and then it's kind of up to us to figure out how we feel about it. What's clearly changed in the media over decades is that money, right? Sponsorship, commercials. In the end, the people who pay money to be on those news stations want results. They want viewership. They want to see Nielsen ratings going up. They want to see it's a business model. So if we invest money in you, you'll tell stories that attract our viewers and increase our marketing presence in our demographic. That's pretty much the business model. People aren't advertising on Fox News to get liberal-minded people.
No.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's an example, and I'm not saying what side I'm on or not, but I'm just as an example. And of course, what we got talking about yesterday was obviously the January 6th hearings and this whole debacle that's going on in our country right now with former President Trump and his manipulation, really, of this problem. I think he was like the perfect character from our Asterix book, the Tortuous. He sees, I think he came in and saw our vulnerability. I think he knew it as a businessman. He knew it for his reality TV show. They studied the demographic. I think they were fully aware of our vulnerability and how easy we are manipulated, right? With just a little bit of information halfway through a broadcast, right? So in many ways, we're just kind of getting to that. We're trying to sort through fact and fiction. What happened?
Okay.
And, how do you feel about that? And I think that's what we were talking a lot about yesterday. But in general, it feels that way everywhere. Everybody tunes into their favorite news source to find their version of the news, and then other people feel that version is wrong. And we have very hard lines. We have a hard time agreeing on things that should be fairly commonsensical.
Well, let me add, I don't know great detail on this, but the overruling of Roe versus Wade, right? That's a very, very sensitive issue.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
and women and their bodies, that's their business, right? We know that. But
this
is not disallowing abortions. It's just limiting how late in the term it can happen.
And they get into all the technicalities.
But
it's a bunch of white men that are making the law. But I think that it's something we shouldn't even be discussing anymore. There's other things on our agenda that feel more important. I thought we covered.
Well,
this.
it got overturned. So I guess the point I'm making is that the real information of what that means you may not really know that. You're going to see a lot of extreme anger and reaction and accusation and I mean the actual facts of what that means. It's going back to the states. Some states will, some states won't.
Right.
But I don't know that if people will understand that. I think they're going to see it as, it's an overturn.
Well, I think it's always been a struggle in the United States from day one. Who's in charge?
Yes.
The centralized federal government or the decentralized states? There was always a greater consensus towards the states running their own business. I mean, in the end, it caused a civil war. It may do it again. But in the end, from the very beginning, every state, when we formed our nation, really wanted their own independence to dictate laws, dictate commerce, run and manage their own boundaries, right? And we've had some balance between that, the federal and the state, and it works well for the most part. Some people don't like it, some people do, and most of us are somewhere in between, right?
Well, let me ask you on that. I want to ask you something about when you look at the Fed raising its rates.
Right.
Okay. You're doing all of our purchasing really, and you're seeing the prices of things, cups, paper products, everything that we use in our industry, green bean. You're seeing all of that go up. Now, when the Fed raises the rate, right, like they just did 0.75 of a point a couple weeks ago, what do you see is happening? What is that doing? I mean, when you talk about the federal and the state, right? When the federal raises that rates, who benefits and who suffers? Because there's definitely, the idea is to slow down demand, right?
Right.
Okay, but who benefits? Is it the lending arms who raise their rates? Is it the secondary credit card industry?
Well,
right?
They're killing it.
They're making a killing. Yeah. So is this a retrieval of all the free money that was given out during the pandemic?
That's what I feel that we're still, it's funny when the pandemic broke and the first responders are very much our regular customers and like almost right away the consensus was this is a 5-year rebuild. This is 5 years. I mean, like that was like they went there real fast in terms of their perception. And I remember being in such denial, and at that time back Trump was like, yeah, we'll be out of this by Easter. And the truth is it started with this calamity of an economic shutdown, right? And then the stay-at-home orders and the isolation and trying to control this outbreak, essentially. And at the same time, our government trying to provide income and money to people that were now laid off, were going to be displaced for some time, and to try to stimulate the economy by circulating money into people's hands. And it worked. It really kept things going at a time when probably they shouldn't have been. Now, they're taking the money back. They got to take the money back. They got to get the money out of circulation in order to try to increase or maintain the value of the U.S. dollar. Believe me, there's nothing that other countries like China would not they would love to see the world come off the dollar standard. That would be incredible.
Well,
so it's really important that we protect the value of the dollar And that's what this rise in interest rates is intended to do. There are benefactors. There are people that take advantage of these opportunities in the lending industry, and that's why they're playing golf right now on a Friday, and we're sitting here talking about it. Because it's money for nothing, is what I've always said. I look back, and I'll give you a perfect example. Years ago, we wanted to get a loan to build out our San Marcos store and take care of some debt, and so we did what everybody tells you to do. We went to the SBA, and we got an SBA loan. We had to put up all kinds of assets to guarantee it, and that particular loan was split 50-50, if I'm correct, between government and the bank itself. So the bank really wasn't into it for that much, And at that time, I think the Fed was lending the institutions below 1%. I think they were getting money at like 0.5%. And SBA turned around and charged us, what was our interest rate at that time? Like about 8% on that loan?
It was over 8, yeah.
On money that they got at 0.5 point.
Oh, yeah.
And it's supposed to be small business advocates. They're supposed to be helping us.
Remember, they wanted our picture on their wall. I felt like an elephant's, tusk or some animal being mounted.
Yeah.
Let's put you up on the wall. Another
Here's
victim.
a coffee guy.
Yeah.
Here's an independent
If you want to
coffee
see
guy.
him, he's down in Logan limping.
Man, and every year they would turn in those forms and ask us to submit our financials. Yeah. Never mind the fact that our loan back to them was being auto-debited anyhow. We didn't even write, it just came out automatically. They were paid on time every month without exception. And they still wanted to see our financials on an annual basis to size us up to make sure we were still solid. And it was so intrusive. Paying that off was one of the best days I can ever remember in this business, when we paid off that loan. But those are examples of like who benefits and who doesn't. In the end, I think we had to raise interest rates. You look at the price of housing here in California, a starter house here in San Diego. A starter house, this is like a 3-bedroom house built in the 1950s. Nothing extra. Maybe 1,500 square feet. It costs you about $800,000 right now. And that's supposed to be a starter house. That is just clearly unsustainable. That is not a workable situation. Now, I know other parts of the country aren't quite that extreme, but it was all this cheap money at 2%, 3% that were driving prices up, and housing more than anything out here went out of control. But that's been a California story anyhow for a long time. But we tend to live like that out here for a lot of reasons. But,
it's a heavy renter's market.
It is, and I think I'll let you get back to what you were talking about facts and fiction. And
Well, let's shift gears a little bit to our mission statement, because I think it's the most important thing. And we are passionate about selecting, roasting, and blending unique coffees and teas to bring people together in special relationships,
it bonds
lasting experiences.
It's a ritual.
Yeah.
I need to rehearse it better than that, but what, let's say it again.
We're passionate about selecting, roasting, and blending unique coffees and teas to bring people together to form special relationships.
I think it says to create a ritual experience that brings people together to create special bonds and relationships.
Ritual is a powerful word.
And I believe it's in our mission statement. And Shane, could you open the door? I'll read it right off the wall. We posted on our door so that we were supposed to look at this every day, and we've walked by it so much. So it actually says, we are passionate about selecting, roasting, and blending unique coffees to create a ritual experience which bonds customers and friends in special relationships. So I think that, man, do you remember doing that too? It sounds like it's one little paragraph. It took us an entire day to create that when we did that with Bob Roy. And we still live by that. Our products have changed. We not only blend in teas and coffees, we're now brewing them as well and serving them on tap, and created Hot Draft to do that. But the idea is to put a cup of something in front of our customers in their table, and it's their moment. And we're here to protect that moment. We're here to create that environment so that whatever that moment is, it's theirs and it's safe here. And I think that, that really has been what drives us day in and day out. That's fact. There's no fiction in that.
I'll tell you, when you think about, like, at least I think the importance of a mission statement is not to, memorize it. It's to understand, like, what's important about our mission statement. Well, it's about a passion for product, to create a ritual experience, to bring people together in
customers,
special friendships.
Community,
so it's
customers,
those three things, and when
product,
you really get
community,
down to it,
product and community is really what we continue. That's why we're still relevant.
Yeah,
because those are real values. Those are real things that that as long as you're committed to product and community can be 2 people or 1,000 people. It doesn't matter. The community and the product, as long as you're doing that right, you're doing it right. That's good. That's always been good enough for us. And it's cool to reread that and always remind yourself of that. You know, we've done this so long now, it's very intuitive to us. But it's important to still have that mission statement to check you, to make sure you're thinking right.
It's a flag, dude. It's
Yeah.
a flag, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about, we'll go to sports. They wear a uniform. They have a logo. They have an identity. You need to have that. As a country right now, our identity is shaken. As individuals, we still have the ability to maintain our individuality and our strength. And with all the noise and confusion, I think when we do this discussion, we go from War of the Worlds, Orson Welles, 1938,
Right.
to 2022. We're passionate about selecting, roasting, and blending unique coffees to create a ritual experience to bond people, right, in special relationships. That's all over the place, but
Right.
not really. Not really.
No,
You're talking about a short window, less than 100 years, from an experience then that is very relevant today. So let me ask you this. How important, when you think about with your kids,
Right.
and with all this noise and division that's going on, how important is education in fulfilling happiness, and how important is literature? Do we talk about it? Do you talk about it with your kids? Do they read? Because the only way to sift through all the noise is to go and find the information. But where do you find it? How important is it? And
Yeah.
what do you talk about with your daughters?
Yeah, you're right. The information clearly has become, getting information so much easier, right? That's why there's so much disinformation out there, because there's an information overflow all across the board. Whereas, like you said, you used to have to go to the library and you had to research stuff. You had to do your homework if you were really interested in something. Today, you get a quick, cheap fix on information. For me, with the girls, with my kids, I just try to get them to read, good stories, expand their vocabulary so they have knowledge of their language, so that if someone's trying to use language against them to manipulate them, they will understand that, right? So language in that is important. So, what you do have to read. I mean, those are all really, really good questions. If you have time, you have to read, you have to inform yourself. Education will always be super important. How you're educated and by whom is a debate as well. Are all educations the same? I would say that they're not. I would say that some people get better educations than others, and that's just a shame, but that's sort of the way it is. But in the end, you're still responsible for your own education. When you think of people like Abraham Lincoln, and this guy was a lawyer, and he taught himself in a log cabin. He didn't have a school. Your ability to educate yourself is even better today than it's ever been if you want to be educated. I think we have a certain amount of complacency and certain laziness in our country to learn, to act. We have a lot of laziness because things are easy. Things come to us easy. Information comes to us easy. Opportunities fairly come to most of us easy. Education is free. It's everywhere. It's easy. So what has value? In the end, as parents, you're that guardian. You're trying to create value in what they're learning and what they're reading and what they're discovering. And trying to keep your kids engaged is a 365 a day contract. Out of their room, off their phones, off the devices. Doing something more real. You can touch.
So let me ask you this: if you think about it, if you were to pick a couple books, you have a couple books offhand that when you think back to your college days. I go to college only because that is a great opportunity to have that one or two professors that's passionate, and maybe they just point you in a good direction that's healthy. But do you have any books off the top of your head that you just remember?
Yeah, I mean,
again,
yeah.
Think about it. Right now, obviously, I'm kind of leaning towards yesteryear for information.
Yeah.
I find more truth in 1938 Orson Welles' War of the Worlds than a lot of the stuff coming out today.
Yeah.
So, because you can find out you can find out a pattern of how to work through a problem, right?
Yeah.
First, the problem itself. You have fact and fiction and confusion. and then how they worked through it. And there was really no resolution at the end.
Right.
But do you have any books, couple books that
You know,
stick
I mean,
out?
I like so many books, but one that always settled with me, a classic, was Last of the Mohicans. You know, I always thought by James Fenimore Cooper. I loved the time period. This is colonial America, the battle between English and French, in particular in Canada, and sort of how the natives took different sides and how that was fought. But the underlining theme was this respect for your elders, respect for, you know, it was the story about the two Native Americans, the father and the son, and I forget their names now. And then, of course, Hawkeye was the adopted American by these two. And just how the son practiced respect towards his father and how Hawkeye constantly narrated on that. And it was just a chain of command between the three of them that allowed them to do phenomenal things, right? And I just think it's a great story. It's a classic time period, but it's also about values and about honor and about sacrifice. In the end, the death of the son, you know, and I just think it's a great book, and it's a lot about America. It says a lot about us here, and the sides, which sides you take, and you know, at that time, the people that were just frontiersmen, you know, people living off the land, threatened by natives, threatened by the French, or threatened by the English. They lived a very precarious life, and they were trying to find a side that protected them. But I always really love that book in particular. I think it really captures a lot about the Northeast in the United States then and now. So that's like an example. And of course, I love the, you know, I was more in the American authors like Fitzgerald and Hemingway. I always liked the way they wrote, and they were telling. Of course, those are stories of the early 1900s, you know, in the swinging times. A pretty cool time of culture. So I enjoyed those, and of course, some other books were like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Great
you know,
book.
as a book I had
Great
to read
book.
in college
Yeah.
when it first came out. I had a very progressive professor who taught a class called Rhetoric in a Free Society. We were actually studying a lot about what we're talking about right now in 1983 in that class. I mean, that was 30 years ago that we were, 40 years ago that we were talking about this and talking about how groups and institutions use speech and the power of speech and ceremony and theater to influence us, you know, and what you're talking about with the media today and how it's become theatrical and it's not necessarily the news, it's a production.
Well, they got us
For
all
a reason.
running.
It's not an accident, and it very much was part of that class. And of course, that book, you know, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, is all about self-discovery and sorrow and loss and really insanity, you know, losing one's mind. But those are some examples of things I've read that I really like. There's been a lot of others. I always loved Gates of Fire, you know, when Pat gave us that book, and just, you know, the true story of that and just how everybody dies, you know, but for the right reason. You know, we don't get to live forever, any of us, so you get to choose sometimes how you die. and that sounds crazy, but that's relevant. That's something always to think about, you know.
Well, you know what? You got to have hope. You got to have hope, and you got to have a common purpose in times of difficulty. And I think when you look at World War II generation and what those soldiers went through, and then you look at the Vietnam generation and you see same quality individuals, just the one group had a common purpose that was recognized and supported,
And valued.
and the other amazing group
Yeah.
was left out to dry because they weren't given that same support. It shows what happens culturally. World War II group, you know, that was horrific.
Yeah.
But wow, we needed to come together. And I feel like when you look at our history, you find more comfort than anything that you'll hear today in the media, because you see that we are resilient, we are diverse, we are unified when it matters, and if we can find our compass and stick to what's important, a lot of the things you mentioned in those books,
Yeah.
values, morals, doing the right things, has less to do with a religious dogma and more to do with being a good person.
Yeah.
And I really feel that the panacea for a lot of the ills today, a lot of the issues, is in yesteryear books, great writings of yesteryear,
Yeah.
the classics. you will find out more about family, about community, about one culture being squashed by another. The early history of the United States, it was a painful time.
It was a violent acquisition of land, and that is kind of the story of the human race, right? I mean, the spreading of out of Africa across the globe, and really, really defining one's territory, and of course, America's the great experiment. This is where we all come together and try to blend. It's been a struggle forever. I mean, within our own family, we've witnessed, we're some mix of Irish, Scottish, Italian, and Polish, and within those groups, they didn't necessarily always like each other, and they had their own problems and quarrels with each other, and yet here we are as their children later, generations later, we're blended versions of that, right? Now that struggle of where you come from isn't quite as important, certainly not within our culture. And I think about a story I saw recently it was called not the infant train, it was the orphan train. So after the Civil War, there was a tremendous amount of loss of human life. Husbands, wives who then died, children were left abandoned as orphans. Thousands of them had no parents. And so they were put on a train and shipped west. They were taken care of. They weren't abused in this sense. There were very altruistic people that were investing in this, and they were sending these children west to be with these families in the West who were developing farms and ranches and building the Western frontier, and they needed people. And so having bigger families, and quite frankly, a lot of them use the children as labor, but so do all families. Heck, we're no different, but they came into this family structure, but they were outsiders, man. They weren't genetically connected. There were thousands and thousands of people that ended up with families they had no ethnic or genetic history to whatsoever. They took on the name, and now they're called a Wilson or a, whatever you want to call it. But are they? No, they're not. We're blended peoples. We always have been. And so when the argument of ethnicity comes up, it's really a dead argument. It's a useless argument in the United States. It may be a bigger argument somewhere else, but here we need to learn to appreciate people for their differences, and it's not always easy. I mean, everybody has struggled to recognize things you don't understand or don't like. Let's just use that word. But, here we have to find a way to listen and be patient and compassionate, or not. And if you choose not, you're going to choose a hard path. It's going to be a more painful, angry path.
Well, remember, what's the old saying? Misery loves company. So for those that are not open-minded, that are incredibly biased or racist, or in that goes across the board, they will end up in a very small group of people because misery loves company. You cannot thrive in our culture and be that way.
No.
And so I want to make a quick parallel jump into gentrification, because we hear about gentrification today, and when you talk about the last of the Mohicans, it's interesting because gentrification, by definition, is a socioeconomic influence. Mm-hmm. But when we hear about it through the theater of media, right, the production that's put on, is often turned into a racial him versus them.
Yeah.
It's a takeover of racial, right?
Injustice. Right.
And it's interesting. This is why I'm saying, find out, do your research, understand the terms you use.
Yeah.
You talk about this a lot down in this neighborhood. It comes up quite a bit. What's your experience with it? How is it talked about in the meetings you go to?
I mean, I think that it's not really I think there's an anxiety. So like any place that you live in, if you were born and raised in any community in the United States, you took great pride in your community. There were churches and sports organizations and grocery stores and other things you went to that catered to your cultural desires and needs, and maybe whether it's food or religion, doesn't matter, your community supported who you were as an individual. And so it's important. It's important in all of our cities. Well, what's happened in a lot of places across the country is that our cities became blighted and run down, right? And a lot of empty buildings and warehouses surrounded by a lot of homes with people that are just either working class or in the poverty level. And so the government has given incentive to businesses to move their businesses into these neighborhoods and to rehabilitate these buildings, to create employment opportunities. And the intent is to revitalize these areas. What happens in places like San Diego is that revitalization turns into exploit, because the opportunity's there. You want to buy, if you have enough money and a plan, you can buy up an entire block, put up a hotel or a high-rise apartment building. Who do you think's staying there? And not the people that live in that community. That's not their culture identity. That's not their heritage. That's not what they believe in, right? And so their space starts getting smaller and smaller, and starts looking different, and suddenly it becomes overshadowed, and pretty soon a community no longer has that identity. It's just another community full of people coming and going, right? And full of all the Vons and Starbucks and all the standard offerings that other communities have. So I think they're, the people that are born and raised in any community are always, fearful of that. We come from little Western Pennsylvania communities that aren't in fear of being gentrified at all, because nobody wants to invest there. Yeah. No, those towns are just dying. They're just going down and down and down. Don't worry about gentrification. It's all about poverty and loss there, and it will continue.
They would love to have. I mean,
yeah, they would love to have that influx. Some people will never be comfortable with different people of either ethnic or economic status coming into their neighborhood and changing some of the culture. Like, that's just okay. I'm not always comfortable with that. I mean, where I live right now, would I want to see a radical change in my community where my home is at? No, I kind of like it the way it is, right? So I appreciate that. We have tried to abide by that. We've come into a community that feels very threatened by investment from the outside to buy up these lands. We've just come in here and opened a coffee shop and became part of the community, and we listen to the community, we support the events, and we sit on the boards and vote on things that the people want. And that's how you make a difference. We didn't come here to gentrify anything. We came here to create value for the people that work and live here.
Well, remember this, I think we'll wrap it up with this. Just like in War of the Worlds, you had some people actually packing up their cars and driving out of town, fearful of being
to the mountains,
vaporized, yeah. Right? And you had other people jumping off bridges, and then you had other people relaxing and enjoying their cup of coffee or tea, knowing it was a theatrical production. So when we talk about gentrification, you will have those that are ready to jump off a bridge, who are ready to jump in the bay because they're worried about the aliens that are coming in to take over. And then you have others who look at it as the opportunity it is. If you're lucky enough to have economic interests coming into your neighborhood, that means your location has a future. We know from going back to Western Pennsylvania, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't they be happy to have anyone interested to come into those steel mill towns with fossils everywhere of yesteryear? Their heyday was the 50s. Yeah. How sad, right? Yeah. So, what do? You open up a coffee shop like us so that you can talk about these things. Why? Because it's stimulating and it is contributing to something. Yeah. In time, hopefully good information and discovery. We all got to do our homework. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yeah, and respect. It's about respect for people. Have respect. And, some of those values are old and they feel, a little gray-haired when you talk about them, but it's true. It's about respect. Respecting your words, respecting your actions, respecting your efforts, and we're a family business. We work with our dad still and our mom, and so that lineage of respect for your elders, respect for your family, it's constantly reinforced and expected here. And that's what families normally expect of each other. It's really probably why a lot of families can't work together, is that they struggle with mutual respect. They have too much history with each other, too many scars, too many issues they can't get over. They love each other, but from afar. It's better that we're not together all the time. So this is it's a tragedy in the sense that family has suffered, almost like when you look at the cultural suffering in the United States, it really gets back to the families. How many families are just, let's just start there. Let's look at the structure of anybody's given family, and is it good and stable and supportive and loving, or is it divided and difficult? And I see a lot of divided and difficult. Oh, yeah. And these are good people. I'm talking about good people, but it's true. And I think that what did Mother Teresa say? Her famous saying is, everybody needs to go home and love their family. If you want to love the world, go home and love your family. And that was, I think, Mother Teresa, I think that was a famous saying that she said. And it's about as simple as it gets, right? Because it's true, Flo. You don't have to overthink this. Just be it, And I think a lot of us need to go home and love our families. That's what I see. When I see buffalo, when I see bare-chested men with buffalo hats on running through the state capitol, They need to go home and love their family. Put a shirt on and get rid of the hat. I mean, I don't care who you are. That's just horrendous. I mean, what is that? What was that look?
Well, that's
what is that? What group is that?
Yeah.
Is this the,
like I said, though,
Preserve the Buffalo group? I don't know who that was, but I saw him in the state capitol. And, go home and love your family, man, and shave the beard and clean up your act a little bit. Tough love is, we have some old school values that way. I always say we're almost Smithsonian pieces in our own right, because of our age and
a lot of that's timeless.
Yeah,
a lot of it's
timeless, and I think that there is something to be said for being tough-minded, in terms of values, good values, and doing the right thing. So that today it's a lot about, we're getting bombarded by the media. We're all these stories, right, man? Whether it's Roe versus Wade, or whether it's the January 6th Capitol, or whether it's Putin in Ukraine and that monster, and whether that pandemic in China, like, it's all bad news, right, man? It is just coming apart at the seams. The truth is, though, most of us still get up every day into a really good world. And our worlds are good, certainly in America. Lots of opportunity. It's about persistence, and when you need to find the truth, work for it. Don't look for the cheap solution. Don't listen to the world's halfway through and assume that the Martians are invading Earth. And somewhere in your mind it needs to sound irrational, right? It's never happened before. Why is it happening today? So, I think that it's really important to always, no matter what you hear and see, step back, pause, move forward with a rational mind in terms of finding good information.
And let's face it, surround yourself with people that are open-minded, curious, and learning. And so the learning should never end. And you don't have to go to a fancy college to find those books and find that information.
Oh, no.
So our next podcast, I want to talk about the book you mentioned. By the way, I think it's much more interesting to talk about these, whether it's War of the Worlds, Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Last Mohicans. Isn't it amazing how much more, to me, vibrant the conversation becomes than today's contemporary stuff?
Yeah.
So remember that. But I want to talk next time about Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because with all the equipment you fix in this building, there is an art to fixing that. You were never trained by anyone.
Yeah, there's a zen in that. And I think that zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is there's a zen in that mechanical process of dissecting a problem and solving a problem, right? There's something very good.
Let me ask you this. We just before we sign off here, isn't it necessity that drives that? Who taught you to do that?
Yeah.
And when you go back there and you fix espresso machines and coffee machines, that is intricate stuff. But isn't it if you don't fix it, you got to pay someone a lot of money to do that, right?
Right.
What is the key to that?
Yeah, it's
necessity.
It is. For us, it was.
Because I don't know if I could do it.
Somebody had to figure that out, because we simply didn't have the money to pay repair companies to come in and charge you $400 for something that costs maybe $50 to really fix. And as you grow a business into much larger scope with more of those $400 problems, you need to start thinking about how to negotiate that. So, you never stop learning. I think what the point of that is that I chose to never stop learning, just like you have in developing patents and ideas and themes and taking them to market and getting them legally processed and protected and everything that goes into that. You're never done learning. You really are not. At least for us, we have a desire to continue to learn, and maybe that's what the next podcast, I think we'll talk about learning and the desire to pursue knowledge.
There's more books.
And to acquire it. Yeah, books and beautiful YouTube today. One thing about YouTube, boy, it's a digital book. You want to research something, learn something, boom, there's 100 versions of that. So in this crazy information age where some of it's really bad, but a lot of it's really good, we just have to learn how to filter through that. And we'll spend some time talking about that, because I think there's a lot there about even running a business, just real information, and what is the truth, and what is the likelihood of your success, based on those truths. You want to start a coffee business? Well, let me tell you how we did it and how you should try to do it, and you still got to do it.
Well, for our next one, you watch War of the Worlds.
I will watch War of the Worlds. It's been a while since
it's
I've
on
seen
Prime
that.
Video.
Yeah.
And then, but I want you to open up with, we'll talk about the interviews of the people.
Yeah.
And that'll be entertaining. Okay?
Have a great Friday, everybody.
Take
See
care,
you next
guys.
week.
Bye-bye.